Go. Hi, everybody. Tonight's program is What is Wrong with Our Criminal Justice System and How Do We Fix It? Janet Kittlaus served on the League of Women Voters Illinois Position Update Committee, working with many local leagues, and witnessed the recent adoption on March 27th of an updated criminal justice position by the League of Women Voters of Illinois Board. Formerly, Janet was part of a team that worked with the Evanston League's successful effort to secure the adoption of an abolition of the death penalty position at the 2001 League State Convention. Janet serves as the League of Women Voters Illinois Criminal Justice, Juvenile Justice, and Death Penalty Issues Specialist. She's currently a member of the Glenview League. She will review the problematic aspects of the criminal justice system and referring to sections of the newly updated League of Women Voters Illinois positioning on criminal justice, just how the system can be improved. Janet, you're on.
Oh, thank you, and it's great to be with you. What I'm going to do is review some of the problematic aspects of the criminal justice system, and then referring to the sections of our newly updated League of Women Voters criminal justice position, suggest how we might go about improving the system. When we say the criminal justice system is broken, we're referring to the entire system. From the outset, before we even look at the criminal justice system itself, we can't help but note that certain communities bear the brunt of negative involvement in the system. In Chicago, for example, most violent crime occurs in communities on the west side and on the south side, and it's individuals from these communities who are most involved in the criminal justice system. What is the situation in these communities? They are poor and they are underserved. By underserved, I mean that their schools are generally poor, young people lack mentors, after-school activities, and after-school jobs. Adults quite often cannot find employment or access funds to begin a business or own a home. These are often food deserts, housing is poor, there's little economic activity, and so on. These conditions present a situation ripe for criminal activity. The entree into the criminal justice system is the arrest. So we look at policing. Instead of officer friendly in these communities, individuals too often fear the police officer. They believe that the police are not there to serve and protect. Members of the community feel that they are treated with disrespect. Police departments have developed a warrior culture, and good cops who see the danger in this culture are fearful to be whistleblowers because to do so may result in demotion or even firing. But it's also true that public safety is broader than policing, and too often police are asked to deal with situations that could be handled more properly by other professionals. For example, people suffering from mental illness and drug addiction should, instead of arrest, receive treatment. Other skilled professionals need to be part of the public safety team. Unless the root causes of an offense is treated, unless the root cause of an offense is treated, an individual with these conditions will find themselves cycled in and out of the criminal justice system. Moving on to the pretrial situation, bond court. This determines whether those arrested will be released without condition before trial, released with conditions such as curfew or electronic monitoring, or whether they will be detained in jail. A major part of the recently passed omnibus criminal justice bill, which is called the Safety Act, addressed the fact that jail has become too often a debtor's prison. Cash bail simply doesn't make a great deal of sense. Why should offenders who have committed violent acts be allowed to go free because they have the funds to bail themselves out, while others who are accused of nonviolent crimes languish in jail because they're poor? And remember, detention in jail can last days, weeks, months, even years before trial. Then let's go on to the trial stage. At trial, the prosecutor is incredibly powerful. Most cases end in plea bargains. Charges are determined by the prosecutor, and the prosecutor has many choices. The prosecutor can divert a case to a problem-solving court, such as drug court or mental health court, or choose to be harsh with a sentence for an offense requiring a term in prison. Or probation may be offered, in which case offenders are free in the community to serve their sentence. But those on probation might also be saddled with a number of restrictions, and the violation of any might mean imprisonment. And although the Constitution guarantees your right to a trial, it's quite often dangerous to hold out for a trial. A plea offer, if not accepted by the defendant, might be withdrawn, and far greater charges might be imposed if the defendant delays or goes to trial. And so, even if the defendant is innocent in some cases, they might choose to take a plea just to get on with their lives, even if it means serving time in prison. If a person is convicted and committed to prison, often this becomes a place to learn how to become a criminal or to become a better one. The emphasis in our prisons is not to restore the person to society. Although our Illinois Constitution states that the objective of penalties imposed after conviction is to restore the offender to useful citizenship, too few of those incarcerated have access to the tools they need to rehabilitate and come out of prison with the skills and education to be successful. Instead, incarcerated people are too often treated with disrespect and subjected to humiliating procedures. But people do come out of prison. Most people do. Once released, people usually return to the same underserved communities from which they came. They will now carry the stigma felon, which will restrict their employment, educational, and housing opportunities. They go through a period of mandatory supervised release, MSR, again with restrictions on their freedom. The violation of any of these rules can land them back in prison. So, what to do? The sections of the League's new criminal justice position addresses many of the issues that need attention. Our first position states, to reduce crime and violence, there should be community-supported and comprehensive investment in underserved and/or impoverished communities. Do what it takes to provide good schools, good mentoring, employment opportunities, social services, in short, investment in all sorts of ways. The goal is to create a thriving community. When a community thrives, crime does not. This is a responsibility of the public sector and the private sector, and happily, this is happening. Our second position deals with bias. It reads, in order to work toward the goal of equal treatment under the law, ongoing evidence-based training for individuals working in the criminal justice system is necessary to check biased behavior. Biases, we all have them. And so we all need to have training so that we can recognize them and hopefully to change our behavior. And then we recognize that there must be a more of a focus on how to treat individuals equitably and appropriately. People are not all the same. One sentence does not fit all. And so this position reads, in order to assure equitable and appropriate treatment of people, the criminal justice system needs to consider their gender, age, health, race, ethnicity, disabilities, and cognitive development. Just to focus on one, age, we know that young people act rashly and often without regard to consequences. They're not criminals, they're kids. And given the proper approach, they can be diverted from criminal behavior. At the other end of the spectrum, old age, people who are no longer posing a threat to public safety, why should they be locked up any longer? Yes, cruelty to such people satisfies a desire for revenge, but is revenge a valid and civilized response? Long sentences must be revisited. We then, in our position, recognize the need to collect and analyze data. We know that too much of what we are doing does not work. Our prisons are overcrowded. Recidivism is high, that is, too many people, having served a sentence, are time after time returned to prison. We must identify what works and abandon programs and policies that do not work. This starts by collecting and analyzing data. In regard to policing, we reject the warrior model, in which the officer sees the community as enemy territory, and we support the guardian model, in which the community is to be served, protected, and respected. The police and the community both must work at creating and maintaining trust. Quality training and education of officers is essential, beginning with recruits, and must be ongoing throughout an officer's career. The mental and physical wellness of law enforcement officers is critical, not only for the officers themselves, but for public safety as well. Moving on to pretrial procedures, people should be held in jail only if they are a flight risk or if they pose a danger. The new Safety Act has abolished cash bail in Illinois. It won't be effective for 2 years because courts have been using bail monies that they retain for the services that they provide through the courts, which, when we think about it, is something of a shameful practice. Why should people who've not even been convicted of anything support the services provided by the court? Isn't that really a function of the taxpayer's responsibility? In any case, the courts will have to find new funding sources. Further, defendants should have present at all hearings a private attorney or a public defender. A defender might see charges lowered or even dropped when the defendant has access to counsel. When counsel is standing with the defendant, often it's learned that the charges really aren't that critical or necessary, and sometimes a person can just walk right out of jail. On to sentencing. According to the Illinois Constitution, the goal of penalties imposed after conviction is to restore the offender to useful citizenship. It follows then that sentencing laws should reflect that goal. Sentencing laws should not be adopted in the heat of the moment in response to a terrible crime or misguided, as much of our war on drugs penalties have proven to be. The League's new position states that evidence-based practices and best practices must guide sentencing laws and prosecutorial decision-making. Prosecutors need to seek justice for all, and not simply convictions. The League supports probation and the expansion of prevention and treatment programs. The League supports the concept of pretrial diversion, where, if a program is completed, criminal charges can be erased and they won't be on a person's record. The League supports approaches such as restorative justice, which involve members of the community and which modifies the adversarial nature of our criminal justice system so that defense and prosecution seek good outcomes for all concerned. Those individuals who must be incarcerated should nevertheless be treated with respect and receive humane treatment. Separation from society is the punishment. Treatment should be supportive and respectful. Those incarcerated should have access to educational and job training programs. Some of those exist. There are programs that exist, but there are not enough of them. We have too many people in prison, and there's a long waiting list for people trying to get into programs. The League believes that incentives in the form of program credits should be available to all, which would allow people to demonstrate their rehabilitation and have the opportunity for early release. Those to be released from prison need preparation because they are going from a situation of dependence to one of independence, from having someone else to make all of their decisions for them to one in which they now must make decisions. They need preparation. Pre-release planning is essential. Transitional living centers can be critical for a successful reentry into society. When the individual is released on mandatory supervised release, the parole officers should be supportive and help the individual toward the goal of successful reentry and not focus on rule breaking, which could return the individual to prison. Finally, or further, the length of MSR should be gauged by the fulfillment of goals rather than a strict period of time, which is often too long and too restrictive. Finally, once released, all unnecessary barriers, such as restrictions on housing and employment, should be removed. There should be opportunities to steal and expunge records in a timely fashion. If someone has served their sentence, why should they continue to be punished with the stigma of felon? I would just sum up by saying that these are some of the essential ingredients in a just criminal justice system. Respectful treatment of those charged, observing their civil and human rights, and avoiding labels like criminal, which degrades their humanity. Something we all must remember, we are all human beings, and making mistakes or committing bad acts does not negate the fact that a person is still a human being. We should focus not on punishment and revenge-driven sentencing, but on rehabilitation and full restoration. That is a tall order because our system is so driven by punishment and not restoration. We should recognize that at the root of some criminal activity are health issues, mental issues, or drug addiction, and those should be treated appropriately. And when possible, impose sentences that actually require accountability, such as restitution to a victim, for example, instead of incarceration, which when you come right down to it, that really does very little to help a victim. At a recent meeting, someone said this: justice should be a healing ground, not a battleground. And that should be our goal. And now, if anyone has questions, I would be happy to try to respond.
Does anyone have questions? I have lots of questions, but I don't want to be the first one to talk if somebody else has a question. Okay, so I'm going to start, Janet, but I want everybody else to feel like they can jump in at any point. So we're talking about the Illinois criminal justice system. As you did this study over, what, a year, 2 years, whatever?
We started in 2017. We started
Okay.
in 2017, and we had to get an extension because the project grew. And well, there are several factors involved, but part of it was getting to be so big. We had started and we didn't realize how the entire system had problems. I'm sorry, I interrupted your question.
No, that's what I wanted to know. But I also wondered if in this process over these 2 or 3 years, the whole Black Lives Matter movement affected anything that you did, or changed your direction, or gave you impetus, or you tell me.
No, that's absolutely right. When we started this, we knew the criminal justice system had issues, but we were definitely informed by the advocates that we ran into. And then, of course, when a lot of these things became more visible to us. I think we all became aware of various things that were wrong with the criminal justice system. Of course, the police, that was a big deal when we actually saw video, and we came to realize that people, you had to trust people when they said, we are not being treated with respect, or we are treated unlike other citizens. And I must say, as a white person, I don't worry about driving at night or any other time. But you hear a lot of people of color say, I've got to be so careful when I drive, and it's so scary if a policeman pulls me over because I don't know what's going to happen. And in that respect, people should not be treated that way. And that's why I say the overarching thing is we need to respect one another, number one. If we simply had respect for one another, instead of bullying thinking there's a population we can bully, or people in poverty or people of color. We came to learn through Black Lives Matter and also through other advocates just what their reality was. I think all of us on the study committee were white. We had no idea what the reality was for other people, but we became aware.
I can't see other people, so does anyone else?
Jennifer, it's
Yes.
Shirley May.
Yes, okay.
Okay. In the law that was just passed, you mentioned that the cash bail won't change for 2 years. So what's happening in the interim with the cash bail situation?
Well, I think number one, there are many aspects of the pretrial procedures. And so local jurisdictions, we have 102 counties. And so, and there are other, and the number of circuit courts are not quite 102. But so judges in various jurisdictions are learning about the ins and outs of the pretrial situation. And they will be going toward that direction. But the problem is a lot of the courts depend on some of that bail money. The way as I understand it, I'm not sure how it works. I'm not sure whether it's uniform throughout the state, but generally speaking, a person can, say the bail is at $10,000. Well, it takes $1,000. You put up 10%, but
Right.
then you only get, so then if you show up for your hearings, you only get back, you lose 10% of what you put up. So the court retains part of that. And they use that to fund some of the services that they provide. And so now they've got to, and so that won't go away immediately because, that's a revenue source. And until they replace that revenue source, they need that money coming in. But that's what they will be trying to do, figure out how are we going to replace this revenue source. And so gradually they will work their way toward the no cash bail.
So in the meantime, people that can't come up with the bail will be jailed.
Very likely. Or, what happens is quite often people at home, scrounge around, they do what they can to find this bail money. Generally speaking, money they can't afford,
Yeah.
so they're begging from this person, that person, or, whatever. And it's very disruptive. It's disruptive to have this person in jail because they might be the primary wage earner.
Yeah.
So that person needs to get out of jail so that they can retain their job. So it's really a tough situation. Of course, if you're a person of means, it's not that big a deal.
Right.
It still might be a big deal, but it's not that terrible.
Mm-hmm.
So talking again, sort of nationally, I don't know who they is, the term defund the police, did that affect any of the discussions within the local league, pro or con, or what did the league do with that term?
Yes. Well, it was interesting because, in the league study, we were supposed to have a pro and a con. When we present our position, you say, well, this is what we think is for it. This is what's against it. And generally speaking, the con for the police was abolish the police. But I think defund the police was kind of an unhappy term, because I think for most people, not all people, I think, people who live in some of these neighborhoods, they say, ugh, the police are beyond redemption. However, most of us don't believe that, or many of us don't believe that. Instead, I think we need to figure out a way, and this is happening in a couple of other states, where instead of 911, you might call a different 11. And you might be, if you have someone who is, with mental challenges, you'd call this number. And so a team would come out. There might be a police officer, but the police officer is accompanied by a mental health professional. And likewise, if a person has issues with drugs, the police officer may come out, but the police officer will be accompanied by a professional who knows how to deal with a person under the influence of drugs, so that you have better outcomes. And certainly, a lot of times, from what I've seen on television, the police really are desperately needed to know how to, to tone down a situation. So many times they are yelling at people. Well, I'm not sure, when you yell at somebody, it usually freaks them out even more. And so there are people, again, with training, a police officer can learn how to do that. You go into a situation and you calm people down. And in many cases, if you calm everybody down, the outcome is going to be a lot better. But no, we don't. The fact is, though, in many cases, we spend a lot of money on police. And we've always thought, well, what we really need are more police. And so we get more police. And in fact, what we need are not more police. We need some of these other professionals to accompany the police. And instead of a police department, it would be more accurate to say, let's have a public safety department.
Yes, right.
Anyone else have some questions?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment, about the de-escalation training. We know that the officer who was found guilty of murder of George Floyd, he'd had quite extensive de-escalation training. Obviously, he didn't learn anything, or he certainly didn't apply it, and then there've been others, that have happened recently too, and so that's really frustrating to me. That didn't seem to help those officers.
Well, and I think the officers who were standing by, I think they were fearful of interfering, because he
absolutely, yeah.
And so, I think, unfortunately, there are, you don't want to label everybody the same, but I think we've got to admit that there are some people who are really not cut out to be officers that we would like to see, who are really not into the mode of serving and protecting. And, they have great disrespect for the people they should be serving. And I think that's what we're trying to do. We're struggling to figure out, how can we keep those kinds of people, especially when you bring in recruits, screen the recruits so that you find people with the proper attitude. And at the same time, people who will not change, who just kind of laugh off the training, somehow we're hopeful of finding a way of removing them from our police departments. Now, I'm not sure this may be in the Safety Act. In fact, I think there is this call to create a database so that if a person leaves a police force under those kinds of conditions, that database is created so that that person cannot find employment in another police department.
Well, I certainly hope that that is the case, because that has been a problem. That's for
Yeah.
sure. And I do know, at least I know that it's true in Elgin, and I assume it is in every place. When they're going through the screening process, mental health screening is one of the things. You know, many years ago, we had a police officer that murdered two young people. And of course, he'd also been screened. But, you know, obviously there are some things that just aren't caught, or they hide it very well,
Mhm.
or something happens that changes. And I don't know. But it's so shocking to find out that even with the screening, we have got, you know, what for lack of a better term, called bad eggs, really bad eggs, you know.
Well, and you know, I think with police departments, again, kind of with this warrior attitude for
Yeah.
such a long time, you know, to have to admit that you needed mental health, you know, treatment,
Ah,
you know, it's you know, you would be looked down upon by your fellow officers.
right,
And
yeah.
I think a lot of police chiefs are good. Police chiefs are good, but you know, they have a police force that they can't impose their will necessarily on
No,
the officers.
that's true.
It has to come, and that's the other thing, is to help the whistleblowers or the officers who do want to be good officers, to make it safe for them to speak out and
Help. Yeah.
try to change the culture.
Yes, right. Oh, hopefully, you know, there's so much attention on all of this today. We can only hope that things are going to change. I know it's going to take a long time, but I am hopeful, you know,
Yeah.
that because of all the attention, you know. And so do I understand correctly, Janet, that as far as the state, you know, the league's position, that has to be approved at our next convention? Is that correct?
Yes, the board adopted the position,
Okay.
but then it will also be, you know, reviewed and adopted by the membership. The membership will affirm the board
Oh,
adoption. Yeah.
okay, so it has actually been adopted. That's good. Yeah. Yes, right.
And I'm very hopeful that, and you know, we've tried very hard to address people's questions and comments. And I should put in a plug. We are having a pre-convention question and answer. If you look on the league website, there are some pre-convention events. And on June 1st at 7 o'clock, we're doing one, and we're basically going through how this whole thing happened. How did we get to where we are? And
Okay.
then we're going through the entire position, and receiving any questions, you know, explaining a little bit about how we can use this position, and then addressing any questions that people have.
Okay. I know this was a huge undertaking on the part of you that were on the committee for the state. And I just thank you so much for doing all that you did.
Well, you know, as you were kind of saying too, you or Jennifer, that wow, what timing! Because just as we were doing
Yes. Yeah.
these last several years have been incredible, and then
Yes.
the Black Caucus had their 4 pillars, one of which was criminal justice, but the others were very much related to it as well,
Uh-huh.
and that
Wow.
and that legislation that went through, and I heard one member of the Black Caucus said, you know, several years ago nobody would listen to us about these matters. Nobody. But
Wow.
because of the protests in the street, because of all that was going on, I think, and the governor, of course, the governor and the lieutenant governor, very supportive. And so the time was right, and they held hearings. Everybody could attend those hearings and listen to those hearings and find out what did they have in mind. And so when the bill was passed, even though it was 700 pages long,
Yeah.
people had a pretty good idea what was in there.
Yeah. Right.
Janet, I have two related questions. So this was an Illinois study.
Yes.
Do we know if any other states are doing something similar? And how does your committee feel in terms of how important it is for us to have some federal legislation as well?
Yes, well, criminal justice, the great part of criminal justice is a state issue. However, of course, there are federal issues as well. And so, yes, the federal legislation that is going on, the George Floyd law, we're hoping that advances. The federal scene is very dicey, of course, and
Right.
I've come to feel like, things move so slowly in the Congress, especially in these last years.
Yes.
But California, they had just, California League had just updated their criminal justice position. And I think they did a massive job. I think they looked at all of the states to see what everybody was doing. and that's how they came up with their position. And I think if you go to their website, you can find their position. Very much the same. They pretty much, some things are kind of relative only to Illinois and only to California, but in broad strokes, it's the same issues.
Great.
Other questions? I have a whole bunch of questions, but I don't want to be the only one talking. Does anybody else have a question or a comment? Okay, then Janet, I'm going to put you on the spot here. You and I both attended or listened to the program on redefining the narrative, which was about women in the criminal justice system. It was, I wish everyone could have seen it. It was the lieutenant governor, and it was the governor's wife, and it was Kim Fox, and it was so many women. But can you and I just talk about, or I'll let you start. Let's talk about some of the issues of women in prison. It was just mind blowing.
Yeah.
Well, I think number one, 80% of the women in prison are mothers. And so, by putting women in prison, you're just pretty much guaranteeing another generation of kids who are growing up under very averse conditions. I remember when I was a kid, the worst thing that could happen to me would be to lose my parents. And there are so many kids who are put in that situation where their moms are in prison. Moms are in prison quite often for drug crimes, which are not that big a deal in the kind of crimes that they're guilty of in the overall scheme of things. When it is violent crime, quite often they've killed their domestic partner, and generally speaking, quite often, it's after years of abuse, and yet at trial, that doesn't come out. And so these women have found themselves in prison. But this group, the Williams, what is it? The Women's Justice Institute.
Yes.
It's their goal to reduce the prison population of women by 50%. And
Wow.
again, mothers, for crying out loud, can't you find some alternatives to the bottom line for a lot of people is poverty. why are these women selling drugs, or why are these women dealing with drugs? They need money. And if they actually had access to a decent, adequate income, they probably wouldn't be doing this. And that's the thing about getting at the root cause of why some people behave the way they do. Maybe they don't have a choice, or at least they don't see that they have a choice. Now, time for you, Jennifer. What did you say?
Well, I was looking at my notes here from that day. It was just, it was so enlightening. And for those of you who did not attend, there were not only all these officials who were attending, but also women who, some of them still in prison, and some of them who were out of prison, talking about the conditions. And so, when you're taking notes in a hurry, sometimes your notes look a little funny. So one of the things I have written down here is that there's been a 776% increase in women's incarceration. I don't know since when, but whatever that is, that's huge.
Yes, so, for sure. Wow.
It's, and then these women talked about how so often in prison they are humiliated or gender discriminated against, or sometimes sexually assaulted, but that's the extreme. But there's not enough privacy. It's humiliating. And so they need to look at a whole different system of dealing. But some of the wonderful stories, Janet, was, and for all the rest of you, were the women who now, because there are some new programs going on, some of them had gone so far as to get a master's degree while they were in prison.
Wow.
Or training, or some of them had become writers, some of them had become poets. It was very, it was a 3-hour program. And so some of it was just so disheartening, but some of it was so uplifting of what could be done if we look at this differently.
Yeah, one of the women, and I don't know whether she's still in prison or what. No, I think she's out of prison now, but her story was so amazing that she wanted an education, and then she was taking classes. And I think sometimes she had to wait, again, because there are lines of people waiting to get into these programs. But she was taking college classes, and it required her to type her assignments. Well, she didn't have a typewriter, and she had very little access to money. And so finally, she had to wait in order to get one of the jobs that was available at the prison. Of course, the prison pays peanuts. As we know, or as you may not know, the Amendment 13 to the Constitution abolishes slavery, except for those who are incarcerated. And the money that people make in prison is peanuts. Anyway, so this woman, she saves and saves and saves, purchases a typewriter, proceeds then to get on with her education. But it was just, and I don't remember her total story, but it was just incredible how this woman, and you've got to admire her. You think, wow, here is a woman with such drive. And this, she was not the only one. These women in prison, they have such drive, and they would be such assets if they would be free and had adequate resources so that they could really pursue what they are talented to do.
And by the way, I contacted Janet and to say, was it recorded and is it available? And you told me it was, right? Yeah. So for those who might be interested.
Highly recommend it. It's 3 hours, so maybe you don't sit and watch it all at one time.
Right.
But, oh my goodness, it was so inspiring, but so horrific in terms of what's going on and what needs to be done to change things, but also inspiring to see that some things are being changed. And Juliana Stratton is the chair of the Illinois Council on Women and Girls. And so they have passed the Women's Correctional Service Act. And what these women were talking about is not just for us, it's by us. We're actively involved in this, and the women needed a voice. And my favorite thing of the entire 3 hours was how many times people in authority would say to these women, I see you. That's what these women need. We need to see them and see what's going on and then try to change things. Well, that was my little sermon. I'm sorry.
And when we kind of trash the criminal justice system, the fact is there are some of the biggest critics of the criminal justice system are in the criminal justice system because they know what goes on, and they're heroic sometimes, because they are working in a system that is so flawed. And yet there are many, many people in the system who are trying to do the best they can. And, as you may know too, prosecutors have been notorious, for trying it. Prosecutors, of course, have to be elected. And so you have to be very careful as a prosecutor. You don't want to go to trial too many times and lose. So that's why, quite often you do the plea bargaining. And of course, our criminal justice system really can't accommodate all the trials that would be necessary because we detain or criminalize so many people. But there are prosecutors now who are much more enlightened. Kim Fox, I think we have a high regard for Kim Fox. For instance, the state law says you can be tried for a felony shoplifting if the value is $300. Well, there's a lot of things that you can just pick up and it's $300. Well, she's not going to prosecute those, or at least she's not going to prosecute those as a felony. Because
well, that's good.
Yeah. And, there are also prosecutors who are looking at the prior convictions and reviewing prior convictions. And as we've found out in Chicago, there are any number of people who were wrongfully convicted. And that continues to come out. But that's encouraging when we see people who do want to seek justice for all.
As we were doing this study, it was so interesting to see the tumble down effect of what happens when somebody is even just arrested, let alone be found guilty. So if you're sitting in jail and can't pay your bail, so you probably lose your job. You may not be able to pay your rent and you lose your home. Your family may have to give up on you. The consequences are just so widespread. This was really interesting. I was so glad I worked on this study this year, and I'm glad the League is doing something. What does the League think about Pritzker's new 700-page?
We couldn't support that because our position, there was so much in that bill. I think most of us were for it, but we couldn't as a league support it because, of course, we do not support anything unless we have a position. Right. And there are so many aspects of that bill, and it was an omnibus bill, so it was all or nothing. And so there were parts we probably could have supported, but we couldn't support the whole thing. But the Cook County League really was ahead of the game because they had been working in Cook County and interacting with advocates there. And very early on, they thought cash bail should be abolished. And then they came to the state and said, oh, we don't have a position on that, do we? Well, our position said we supported the bail system. So no, we can't do anything about that. But we caught up with Cook County, and that became one of our positions that we had to adopt was the abolishing cash bail. And there are just other aspects of you may have, I used to watch The Good Wife, and they actually, and that took place in Chicago, and they actually showed bond court once, and it was absolutely true. You basically, the public defender might just meet you for the first time, the defendant, and you have about 10 minutes, or if that, And then you stand before the judge and you have about, in 45 seconds, generally speaking, you are sent back. Well, the bail is set. The bail is set, which is usually horrendous and you can't come up with it. But much has been done in Cook County, though, since those days. The bond court is much more. They actually, I believe, they really have gone to no cash bail in Cook County, because they had been looking at this for a long, long time, and also how much time a person would have with their public defender, so that you could actually make a case for why I should not be detained in jail. And so that the public defender, and there's also pretrial service people who interview the defendant, and they learn what the background of the defendant is, and have they been involved in criminal activity before, what are the pros and what are the cons of holding this person in jail. And so that has become much better in Cook County.
Wendy and Faye, and I can't tell, has Lois joined us? You guys haven't jumped in yet. Anybody want to say something, add to it, have a question, a comment?
I guess I don't have any questions right now, but it was very interesting. And I especially appreciate hearing a lot of the positions, I don't know, just kind of presented, discussed as we were going through the study. It was a lot of reading.
Yes.
so it's kind of refreshing to hear it, like, as a presentation.
I agree.
Well, I think, our criminal justice system, we are so focused on punishing people. It's always kind of it's a zero sum, right? It's not win-win, for victim and offender. It's I win, you lose, and actually going to a restorative justice mindset, where you're trying to seek the good for all. Because again, that the bottom line, lots of offenders, I dare say the majority of offenders, they have some issues in their life that made them the people they are, just as we all have issues in our lives which made us who we are. And restorative justice has been around a long time. It's been used with juveniles, especially when a juvenile, breaks your window or does something. If the victim is willing, you would sit down together in a circle with community members sitting around, and you would tell your story, and the victim would say to this kid, you really hurt me. And sometimes the kid had no idea. Kid just thought, well, I wanted that, or and they had no idea they were hurting this person. And then you hear the kid's story, and the victim says, well, you had a pretty tough life too. And quite often what comes out of something like that is you come together so that the offender is held accountable. What can I do to make this right? And quite often the other person says, hey, you need some help too, and I'll help you out. And wow, wouldn't that be great if we would approach more of that kind of a mindset, where we look around us and everyone has issues. And we need to be more charitable toward everyone.
Yes, right.
I use a term often about unintended consequences. And so back in the 80s, when we were passing these laws of, we got to take care of these drug issues and we've got to lock more people up so that we're safe, we had no idea, I don't think we had any idea, of all the unintended consequences of what was going to happen, of breaking up families, of the cost of the system, of how punitive it became, of how it could be abused. And so I'm one of those people who says, when you know better, you do better. So I'm hoping that partly because of all the work that the league has done, and the league is big on education, that I think that as we go about trying to teach more people about what the system is like and how it could be better, that this is the next step. I don't know what you think about that, Janet, but in my mind, I'm thinking that's where we go next, is more education about the system.
Yeah, absolutely. And this bill was so controversial, this omnibus crime bill, criminal justice reform bill, the Safety Act. And, a lot of people are spreading a lot of misinformation about it. And we do have, we have a speakers bureau that we offered to people, during our study. But then there are other advocates who are offering to go out and about and do programs to tell people for sure what this bill is all about and why it's a good thing. And if anybody needs to, I think I sent that out. I don't know if you're on the Google group. There are a couple of lists that from time to time we will send out. And that's how you knew about the women's program, because I would send it out to the Criminal Justice Google group. And also there was another list that's going to go out of existence after the end of this General Assembly, because these people may not want to hear about this anymore. These are people who are participating in the study. And so I'm going to say, hey, you guys, if you want to know anything more, join the Google group, because I'm not going to bother you anymore after hopefully May 31st.
Well, in terms of trying to end this program at an hour, since it's being recorded, Janet, thank you so much, not only for all the work you've done over this time, but for also presenting to us. But I also want to announce to everybody that the next program in this whole series of programs we're doing is affordable housing, PADS in Elgin, on Wednesday, June 9th at 7:00. So please join us. And thank you, Janet, again.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you, Janet.
This is Shirley May. There's one other question I have. I mean, I believe in this restorative justice and so forth like that, but with all the gun shootings, the shootings now,
Yes.
did this study look at gun violence?
I don't think gun violence is going to be solved until we until we get rid of the Second Amendment.
That's not going to happen.
And that's not going to happen. Yeah, right.
You never know. You never know.
But I'm just saying that if shootings are involved, restorative justice is another story.
I think there are many reasons why people have guns. And sometimes, felons are not supposed to have guns. And yet the people who come out of prison, they are probably the people who most need a gun to defend themselves. That's the conundrum. But it's a difficult, I don't know, it's too political, right? It's too political.
It is.
Yes.
We know there are things that could be done, and we know that things could be tracked better and databases established, but it's so political that one side says nope, not going to do anything.
Right.
So as far as I'm concerned, we've had a wonderful discussion. Thank you, Janet. Wendy, do you need to say anything to close this meeting out?
No, I don't. Thanks for joining us.
Thank
Thanks
you.
everybody on YouTube for watching.
Thank you for inviting me. I enjoyed it so much.
Good,
Thank
thank
you
you.
for-
Sure did too.